I want to just remind the audience that if you have questions, you can put your questions in the Q&A, and we'll have 10 to 15 minutes of time after Jiwoong's presentation to go with questions and discussion. Thank you so much, Jiwoong, for joining us today, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Matteo, for the kind introduction. My name is Jiwoong Lee, and today I will talk about our project, one project related to CO2, of course, but also we are utilizing, this is something that I frequently asked about the CO2 utilization or sequestration. Actually, in this talk, I will give you one example how we can utilize CO2, not capturing it, but probably we will try to capture it in a different ways, but in a way of desalination. So desalination, of course, everybody knows that it's important because water is probably one of the important resources for mankind and or the biological and even abiological systems. But it's limited. It's mostly seawater that I was trying to depict in the figure, that the ocean, the water, which is also related to the next speaker, which will provide much richer information. In our case, we will try to show that the CO2, the single simple molecule, can be utilized in desalination. Of course, it's based on the abundant knowledge in this area starting many years ago, that CO2 can interact with many different types of organic, inorganic species. And then here, as an organic chemist, that most favorable reaction of CO2 can do is nucleophile interacting with the CO2, since CO2 is intrinsically Lewis acidic and electrophilic on the central carbon. This is an equilibrium, so nucleophile can interact with the CO2 and release it back to the CO2 and nucleophile. And of course, one of the examples that CO2 can be utilized has been already reported by, for example, the Philip Yasop, that was a speaker in this CO2 research talk 1 month ago, last year in 2022. That is showing that the CO2 can be used as a stimuli. So in this case, we have this alkylated, in the Yasop's case, that alkylated amidine type molecule, either C16 or C12. In aqueous phase, it can generate, as usual, making CO2 capture species, in this case, ammonium bicarbonate. And as you can see here, this laser pointer, just a second. In this case, the immersion can be formed in the presence of the CO2, so that the molecule is hydrophobic, of course, due to this long alkyl chain. But after interacting with the CO2 and making this ammonium bicarbonate, it can generate a responsive system that can emerge by water phase and the organic phase, and also is reversible. So, for example, in this case, after 5, 30, or 24 hours standing after CO2 bubbling, it can generate the immersion. But after heating it up, so heating it up means by taking advantage of the CO2 and the amidine-based reversible interactions that can liberate the CO2 back to out of the system, out of the liquid system, that can generate this two-phase system back. So one of the examples that in this Philip paper, they demonstrate that sometimes you can use this kind of responsive system to emergify, for example, petroleum oil and water mixture that can be homogenized and reversible. And you can see also on the right side that CO2 and argon. So argon is to replace the CO2 in the liquid system, and then they measure the conductivity to show the reversibility. You can see that the cycles can be different, but at least 3-4 times you can put it back and forth in terms of conductivity. And therefore, the whole reversible CO2 responsive surfactant system can be utilized for in some industrial applications. Yes, so this is a common CO2 diamine interaction scheme in terms of nucleophile, electrophile interacting in a reversible fashion. Of course, this is depending on the nucleophilicity and basicity of the amine, but in this case, I show one example with the 1,2 diamine, which is cheap and abundant, a little bit corrosive, but that's something that we can discuss in a different types of talk, that the CO2 can be fixed in ecosystem by generating either bicarbonate or carbonate to show that this ammonium bicarbonate formation can be favored. It's a spontaneous reaction, of course, exothermic, and that's why MEA or diamine, these type of amines are used for CO2 capture. And another good example of utilizing this kind of molecule is, of course, you can fabricate this molecule in a, for example, metal organic framework. So amine appended MOFs. Also, this is pioneered. This type of CO2 capture material was pioneered by, for example, Jeff Long, who is also coming for the CO2 research talk later. I think it's March. So please sign up and register the talk. But more importantly, we can tune the property of the metal organic frameworks, solid state adsorbent, and you can use this to really push the limit of the CO2 absorbance, so low CO2 pressure, so you can aim at the flue gas CO2 capture or even direct air capture with high water resistance. So this is another area very exciting for CO2 capture. But we would like to show that the CO2 and diamine interaction in aqueous phase, so small organic molecule interacting with the CO2 in aqueous phase, and harvesting this interaction, reversible and spontaneous interactions in a different way. So in this case, of course, you will form ammonium bicarbonate. And then since this is ion pair, so ammonium cation and bicarbonate anion, if there is some other anion or cations in the same system, we can do something in this case by taking advantage of removing this ammonium. So this is again protonated amine. You need another base to deprotonate to regenerate the diamine back to the system. So one of the well-known strategy of using CO2 in the industry, of course, this is old process, industrial process, but of course, the company still exists, the Solvay process. So in, let's say, more than 100 years ago, actually, it was responsible for the soda production, soda for baking, of course, in this case, for industry. Before mining was more profitable, this was the main production pathway for soda, sodium bicarbonate, sodium carbonate, more than 1 million tons per year. And if you look at the process, it utilized CO2 as a core, and actually CO2 is not being used, it's actually catalyst, so it's in the cycle. So I will go through the cycle a little bit more carefully because this is a little bit, a lot of arrows and components. So we start with the carbon dioxide. Forget about the stoichiometry for a while because it will come later in a clear way. CO2 will interact with amine base. In this case, just it's happen to be ammonia because it's cheap, it's a gas, it will react with the CO2 fast. And then there should be some water present. And then we are doing basically CO2 capture, right? Because amine will interact with the CO2, and then there is water. So eventually you will end up 2 molecules of ammonium bicarbonate. So this is a CO2 capture step. Then this ammonium bicarbonate will be exposed to a little bit salty water. So in this case, brine or seawater even, and let it exchange their ions because ammonium is cation and bicarbonate is anion. And of course, we have sodium and chloride, which is cation and anion. So after reaching the equilibrium, you will generate then ion exchanged species, in this case, ammonium chloride. Of course, then the other part is sodium bicarbonate. In this Solvay process, actually in high pressure and low temperature, you can tune the solubility. So in this case, the solubility is targeted to precipitate out sodium bicarbonate. So when the sodium bicarbonate is precipitated out, of course, then the equilibrium shifted. So more ammonium bicarbonate and sodium chloride will be exchanging to give ammonium chloride. In the end, the process is designed to heat up. So you liberate 1 molecule of water and CO2 and generating sodium carbonate, which is a final product. And then the obtained water and CO2 will be used for the cycle, right? So then or the stoichiometry of this reaction is completed, while of course the ammonium chloride is protonated ammonia, so it has to be treated with the base. They use the calcium oxide limestone to deprotonate the ammonium chloride, generating calcium chloride byproducts. So we can also use ammonia as a catalyst in this cycle. And the source of the limestone is coming from the calcium carbonate calcination. So this is the energy demanding step. But of course, the source of the CO2 is coming from the process itself. So overall, this process represents the cyclic use, so catalytic use of CO2 and ammonia, and producing overall from calcium carbonate to sodium carbonate. So we envisioned to use this process by simply replacing the ammonia with some sort of insoluble amines. What would happen then is that we can do CO2 capture because we have amine. We can tune the nucleophilicity, we can tune the basicity. We have the amines available in many different types, synthetically available, commercially available. Let it capture CO2 in aqueous phase. We just simply use seawater. We know that the seawater is complicated, but we just target on the sodium chloride. Let them form the ammonium bicarbonate, ion exchange. Since our amine is insoluble or less soluble, we presume that the ammonium chloride also is insoluble and then can be regenerated by deprotonation, while the produced sodium bicarbonate, of course, then can be protonated, removing the sodium and generating pure source of CO2. So in the end, we can also think about some sort of CO2 capture cycles. But main process that we are trying to show is that we take the seawater as a source, and in the end, we are generating salt-free water. So we are achieving the overall desalination using amine and CO2 as a catalyst. So we are organic synthesis lab, so we produced a lot of different types of amine. You remember the Philip Yasov's cases, so we need some responsive system, so we put some alkyl chains to change the solubility of the diamines and some other types of amine. And then we end up having highest CO2 responsiveness using this type of 1,3 diamines. We measure the conductivity, and we assume that conductivity is a good indication for the overall CO2 capture and anion exchange processes, because in the end, sodium chloride conductivity is much higher than other ions. And this is a very simple process starting from the model seawater. So we have, let's say, 35 grams of sodium chloride in 1 liter, which is corresponding to around 60 millisiemens. After CO2 bubbling and then ion exchange, actually the time of this process is quite fast, around 2 to 3 or at least like 10 minutes. And then we can achieve conductivity reduction to verify the structural motif required for generating this CO2 capture and ion exchange. We also determined by varying the amount of the diamines that we used, and also carefully following how much CO2 is needed to reach the minimum conductivity. And then you can see that the slope, maybe the number is quite small, but we usually need less than 0.5 equivalent of CO2 to achieve minimum conductivity. So then after achieving minimum conductivity, as you can see in this picture, at the beginning, we have 35 grams per liter of salinity solution. After CO2 responsive process, we can see that there's some phase separation, which we confirmed by DLS that it forms a higher aggregate. This is not defined particles, but it's a random aggregates that we are still investigating overall the structure. But good thing is that if it forms particle, we thought that it's easy to just filter it out. So if we can remove those precipitate and then check the salinity of the solution, then actually we can see the salinity is much lower. So this is overall, of course, CO2 mediated desalination. But the problem was that the diamine is slightly water soluble that we are using. And also the aggregation separation was not efficient through the ultrafiltration, so water recovery was actually it's terrible. But it was a good indication that we can do desalination using very simple molecule, which is diamine and CO2. But this has been kind of tested in, for example, metal extraction. So Leclerc from Lyon, he showed that some sort of polyamines can capture CO2, interact with soft, let's say, big cations, in this case, metal cations, nickel, cobalt, and lanthanides, and then extract the metals, so then we can recover metals from, for example, some organic solvents and a little bit polar solvents. And this is basically coordination chemistry, right? Because amines are good ligands for metals, but also carbamates can interact with the metal center. So we can harvest these interactions to actually remove, for example, toxic metals. But sodium is actually quite difficult because it's small and hard. So we thought that we need more, even stronger system to change the equilibrium. So we, in the end, to realize this scheme, right, the amine being used for CO2 capture, going through ion exchange, especially with the chloride, and then generating insoluble ammonium chloride. So we, sorry, okay, the one animation was misforwarded, but in the end, we took the polymeric system that can be used as a amine surrogate. So we took the amine, so we can follow by even NMR that the amine alkylation, and in this case, it's a model system. Therefore, we use HCl for full protonation, and then we can regenerate the protonated amine with the KOH. So among these many different types of the PEI, so we took this polyethylene imine, amine-rich polymer as a candidate, and then we utilize as a CO2 capture and ion exchange system. And this happens also same in our model system with the brine and then CO2. For example, we can just take the free amine, alkylated free amine, because without alkylation, the PEI solution is just water soluble. And then after treating with the CO2 in brine solution, you can generate slightly modified, so in this case, a protonated ammonium salt with the chloride and bicarbonate, which can be again deprotonated to generate the original structure, which is alkylated PEI. So we confirmed this by C13 NMR and other techniques. For example, thermal analysis, TGA analysis. Here you can see that we compare with the protonated PEI, which means we separately prepare the PEI polymer with HCl. So we know that this is ammonium chloride solution. And if you compare that with the desalination residue after using the polymer for the desalination, we can see that it shows, in this case, a two-step thermal degradation, which is resembling between the protonated one, so either protonated ammonium chloride or ammonium bicarbonate, and also the regenerate, so activated PEI. So we assume that this is a strong evidence that we have this polymer changing the behavior after protonation and deprotonation. So what is going to happen? So we show in this scheme again, so we start from this alkylated amine. We're going to expose to CO2, which will make this polymer as a ammonium bicarbonate form in brine solution. And then in brine solution, therefore, we will have ion exchange, the statistical ion exchange, and then generating sodium bicarbonate. The polymer itself is now, some part is ammonium chloride form, which can be, again, just take out the polymer and then treat it with the sodium hydroxide to generate the brine, let's say high concentrate brine, and generating the free amine back for next cycle. The solution that we have, let's say desalinate, dechloride, the chloride removed solution has some sodium bicarbonate, because then this is easy to remove because you can just treat it with a ion exchange reagent, again, in this case, sulfonic acid reagent, which will protonate the sodium bicarbonate, generating CO2, and final solution will be just water. we didn't show that we can remove all the salts because of the efficiency of the polymer. What we show is starting with the like real seawater from Copenhagen canal, which is let's say half or less than half salty, then saltier, less salty than average seawater in the world. So in terms of salinity, around 17 gram per liter. We start from the Copenhagen Canal seawater after just filtration without treating anything. You can see that the chloride concentration gradually goes down after a cycle and cycle. And sodium concentration doesn't change that much, but it goes down only when we treat it with the acidic ion exchange resin. And in the end, we can achieve around 5-6 gram per liter of salinity, achieving desalination. But this was even long process for us because at the beginning we started with a 20 milliliter scale. DASTA studied this process, and then also we had some help from the spin-off company Coatec and Alexa. We made the large scale polymers, but in the end we end up using this continuous resin modified with the diamine so that we can efficiently test the CO2 capture and ion exchange systems. So one thing that we can show is that we have now this free amine modified resin, more or less half liter system in the column. And you can see here this chloride breakthrough experiment that without CO2, so just if you let this resin exposed to the seawater, the chloride will just come out without any hindrance. So you can see that almost quantitative chloride recovery if there is no CO2 involved. But after activating this amine resin with the CO2, of course, then you're generating ammonium bicarbonate. And then if you flow in the seawater, and you get salty water, then you can see that most of the chloride is removed. Of course, we control the amount of the salinity, how much we are putting in. But in this case, 5 gram per liter or 3 gram per liter seawater can be used and then removed quite high efficiency. And then we, of course, check with the other measurement analysis to confirm this. And this is something that we can do in a continuous setup because we have resin and pumps. And you can see on the left side the video that at the beginning we show that there's nothing happening without CO2, this gray one. So all the chloride is coming out. And then you wash it with the sodium hydroxide, a little bit of more sodium chloride coming out. But if you compare with the CO2 processes, so if you activate the resin first with the CO2, of course, we don't see any chloride, not any, but significantly lower concentration of chloride coming out of the effluent. And then after regenerating the column with the sodium hydroxide solution, so we are just adding a little bit of base, then you can see that the chloride is recovered after the process. So this is the process that we think that is kind of comparable with the existing system. So if you compare, of course, this is a big business with the RO membrane desalination, which has been very much well optimized. So this is a rough calculation that in terms of at different salinity, our method can compete with other existing method in terms of desalination energy consumption, because energy consumption in our process is basically calculated based on the chloride process to generate the HCl and sodium hydroxide, because otherwise our whole process is just recurring the pumping, so pumping the water. We just need the CO2, which will be captured and in a form of sodium bicarbonate. And then we can actually sequestrate and up-concentrate CO2 using this process. So there is some advantage in terms of utility of this process. And of course, we didn't check only sodium chloride. We are investigating other ions and cations and anions. So all showing some sort of responsiveness in terms of conductivity. We are investigating maybe we can use this process, CO2-mediated ion exchange, for example, perfluorinated acid for water purification or other ion extraction or sequestration. More interesting as a perspective is that we actually can use, we are using a CO2 as a catalyst. This is a little bit outlandish concept because we are not fixating CO2, but one thing that we can show is that we can take polymeric system, we can do depolymerization using CO2 as a catalyst. We are not consuming CO2, we can use CO2 as a catalyst. So it's a catalytic CO2 for degrading polymers. You can see that the reaction doesn't happen under nitrogen, but under CO2, we can isolate this kind of building blocks for organic chemistry. And recently we found out that we can even do this for polyethylene terephthalate. So polymer, very common polymer mixed with the cotton. So this is another thing that the cotton is not easy to recycle when it's interwoven with the PET. We can generate pure BHET monomer and while recovering cotton using this catalytic system in large scale. Our students show that we can do kind of mimicking the garbage can. So we just mix all the polymers. We can show that we can recover the, in this case, monomer. The color is different, but it's just a color coming from the garbage. So I don't think this is affecting our science and technology, and we can recover the cotton and other things. And this is next is our last slide that we are also investigating the same process that we can use CO2 as a catalyst or at least a mediating certain process, in this case, decomposing polymers and garbage material, basically garbage as a important material to capture materials. So we are using this for generating CO2 absorbent, working with another CORC member, Troy's groups. With that, I'd like to thank my group. So I've been showing some pictures of the students, but Anand was the main player, and then Desta showed the initial promising result in terms of desalination and other students. Also, I'd like to thank the Coatec company and who drove the process, actually accelerated the process, and the funding agency, MEDP, and Fielding Foundation for financial support. And Matteo, I think that's it. And thank you for your attention. And I'm ready to answer any questions if you have.